Hey everybody and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to show you two different ways that you can work with APIs in the new SAP Build Apps, formerly known as Appgyver. Now this is going to be the free edition. They've had a couple of updates recently, so I wanted to walk through a couple of things, but I will put some resources in the description, such as a playlist for Appgyver tutorials. There have been a bunch of changes, but a lot of those tutorials, for the most part, will still work in the new interface. This is one of the things that I did have a request or two on providing videos for. So let's go ahead and jump straight in. I have a sample page here, and I'm going to walk you through what I've already done to save time, and then we'll go through doing the rest together. Now, I typically use two methods in Appgyver. So the first is going to be a post flow function. So what that looks like, and I'll show you that in more detail in a moment, is just this HTTP request using the post method. Now, the second option, if you go to your integrations page, you can't add an integration in the community edition, but if we scroll down just a bit more, we can create a data entity and use the Universal REST API integration. There is also an OData integration if you want to use that. Now, what we're going to do in this video is I have some of my older REST integrations set up here. So we're going to work and basically just really just go through the process of setting this up, but in the new data entity section. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and go over what I've already done for this app. Now, if you want an overview of the new interface, I'll put a link to that in the description. I made a video on that as well. So first things first, we'll go over the UI that we have, and I'll explain why I have it the way that I do. So first, we have a little title element. You can put title or text, doesn't really matter which. Then we have a second one that is identical. So both of these are actually the text elements. I've just dragged them straight over. Then I have two input fields. Now, you'll see we can just drag the input field over, and I have two of those, and then I have two buttons. Now, text element 1, you'll see, is bound to a variable. So let's go ahead and check out what variables we have. Now, we'll go over the app variables in a bit because those are going to be important, but right now we just have page variables. I've just clicked add page variable 5 times, and it auto-named 1 through 5. We can go back to our interface, select the first text element, click content, and then you can go to data and variables, page variable. I've chosen variable 4 for this one. And then I followed the same process, but selected variable 5 for this one. Now for the inputs, I just put the label for 1 for the first one and 2 for the second one. Now I followed the same process that I just did for the variables. The first input is variable 1. The second input is variable 2. Now, basically what we're setting up so far is saying, I'm going to type in something. So this is the page that we're working on. So we're saying, I'm going to type in something here, and this is going to be page variable 1. I'm going to type something else here, and this is page variable 2. When I click this button, it's going to send it off. The reason these are going to be different variables is I want to show that we actually pull that data back. If I set them to be the same variable, it's not as easy to tell that the data is being sent or pulled. So we have those values set up, and you can go ahead and do that. Next, we're going to do the standard HTTP request first. So I've added in 2 buttons here. Button 1, I've just called it post. You can double click in here and type in your text. So I just put post. Button 2 is get. Now for button 1, what we're going to do is we're going to just put the post on top. That'll be the first one that we do. So we can click that button, and then you can click Show Logic. Now, if you don't already have it, you can click Installed and go to Marketplace and just type in HTTP. And we're looking for the HTTP request. So you can go ahead and add it and then drag it over here and basically just connect the two. Now, when we select this, we're going to have a couple of things that we need to customize. So item 1 is the URL. Item 2 is the HTTP method. Item 3 is the request body. So for the first option, for the URL, we're using Firebase. Now, I don't usually use other backends just because I'm more familiar with Firebase. So we can go to Formula, and then I'm going to paste all of this in the description. But I want to walk through what we're actually doing. Basically, we're going to set up an app variable to name our project. That way, it's a little bit easier going through the app. You can just update the project name in a single place. The rest of it changes automatically. So the way that the Firebase URLs work, if we were to go in Firebase, I already have a collection called chat, but I'm going to show you how to make these automatically as well. So you'll see as you go up, we have in Firebase, you can go to your project overview, but you can see in your URL, your Firebase project is typically going to be right next to project. It's just this text right here. It's in between these two dashes. Now, you also have other things such as your chat or the documents. You'll see that it has 2F in front of it, but you'll see we have chat and then 2F and then 1233. So that's the document, that's the collection. Now, the way that this is set up currently, I want to go ahead and delete this just to show you what is actually going to happen and just to kind of prove that it works to post new data. So we're going to go ahead and delete the entire collection. So there's now no chat collection at all. So we have this entire URL, which I'll post in the description. But basically, what we have is our app variable called project. So we'll go ahead and set that up together. So we're going to go to variables, and then you'll see app variable. You can just click add app variable here, and it's called project. And then what I've done here is I've just pasted in that project, and you'll see again, it's right here. So you can do that for yourself. That way, as you go throughout different pages of the app, you can just update the project in one single location. So we have that app variable. Now we'll go back and we will click on our post and on our HTTP request because we now have all of everything defined. So the first half of the URL is just saying we're doing this in Firestore. The second part is we're doing it in this project. This part here is specifying the collection and the document itself. So if you want to specify a collection and auto create random documents, that's option 1, which we'll go through in a moment. If you want to go through and actually name the individual documents, we can do that as well. So we're going to create both first. And actually what we'll do to make it a little bit more simple, the only addition that we're going to be making is really just a quick change. So I'm going to cut this out and I'll just put in this double quote. Now I'm going to click save. So basically that's everything for the URL. Next, change your method to post. We're starting off with making a collection only. We don't need headers right now, and you can click here and then you can go to formula, and I'll paste this in the description as well. I've specified we have value 1, page variable 1, value 2, page variable 2. What this means is we're posting page variable 1 and 2 to value 1 and 2 in Firebase. So let's go ahead and click save, and then we'll try running this very quickly. So I'm going to go back to the test page. I'll type in hello, and then I'll type in a bunch of numbers, and then we'll click post. Now we'll go over to Firebase, and sometimes if you're putting a new collection, you're going to have to refresh the page to get that collection to appear. So you see we now have chat, and you'll see we have a random document name and our information. So if I wanted to, I could go in and post some random additional letters and click post, and if we switch quickly enough, we might be able to see it actually come through in almost real time. So now we have the new value here, and you'll see we're just getting random document names. Now, this can be useful. However, one of the issues with this is if you need to pull in that document name and you haven't saved it, it's going to be harder to get those records later. That's where the next method comes in. I have other videos with more detail on just generating a unique ID and saving it elsewhere in my how to create a social or sharing app playlist. But basically, if you want, you have option 2, which is what I'm posting in the description. So now we're going to specify a document name. So we're going to go back and paste in what the URL was originally. Now I'm going to create a document and I'm going to name it something specific. Now, you'll see that it's going to be 1233, but if you want, you have the option to replace this with an app variable, and you could just call it maybe our project name or another app variable. You can also replace it with a page variable and name it one of the variables we already have. I'm going to choose a static value, which obviously you cannot do repeatedly without causing some issues, but that's just the general idea. So now what we're going to have in chat is we're going to have a document called 1233, and that's just random numbers I chose. So now we're going to type in some random values. We'll click post, and then move up here, and you'll see we right now have a document 1233 with those values. So that's the basics of posting the data to Firebase. Next up, what we're going to do is method 1, which actually is going to also be very similar to the second method I was already covering, to get records. Because we have a flow function to get a record, but to use this, we actually have to set up our integration. So the first method for posting data is to just click on post and use a HTTP request. Now you do have the option to do a get request right here, and then you don't need a request body, and you can actually just pull in that data and have the raw response. The downside to this is you don't have the easiest way to actually go through the process of pulling the data and extracting it in a clean way. I do have a video on cleaning API responses, but the general idea is if you want to use the get record, then you can actually just take the post that we've already used and then paste it, and we'll call this get1, and we'll make this very, very quick. So we can switch the exact same request we just used, and we'll just use a get request. And then we will change the request body to be no value. Now what we can do is we can go back and choose to set a page variable, and we're going to want a page variable that's visible for this. So we will select this, and then we want to use page variable 4. So we'll choose this, and we're going to set page variable 4, and we're going to set that to output of another node, HTTP request, and you'll see we have a couple of options here, and we'll use the raw response body. Now let's click save. So now when we go to our test page and we click get one, the theory would be that you click this and then your response is going to appear up here. Now in this case, for your request, you will have to make a couple of changes just to make sure that we're pulling in something that is valid. So we can go ahead and fix that. So the simple fix for the GET request is just to remove this part right here, $document ID equals. Basically, this is what you use to post, but when you're pulling the data, there's not going to be a record by that name. So we're just saying we want to find this collection, this document, these values. So what we're going to do, and this is going to be very similar to option 2 that we'll cover in a bit, so we're just going to click save. And then we'll go back to test page 2 and click get. Now, you'll see that there's a bunch of data, and this is the reason that when you're using get records in Appgyver or SAP Build Apps, it's much easier to use the integration section so that you can actually set a schema and pull the data. You can use the clean API response option from another video, which again I have on my channel, but it's a lot more work, and if you have larger records, it's going to be difficult to work with. But the important thing to see here is we have value 1, FGHJ. If we go over here, you'll see as we scroll through, you can try to basically pair the different items with everything. So you'll see that we have chat 1, 2, 3, 3, and you'll see the value 1, value 2, and then you'll see these created times, and then you'll see chat 1, 2, 3, 3, value, etc. So the general idea there is you're pulling in this case, this chat, because it's called chat 1, 2, 3, 3. If we want, we can pull in what we were just on by simply adjusting our URL and just pulling in chat. So we'll click Save, because we pulled in this page here, and that was these records. Now we've set it up to pull this page. So we'll see when we go to Test, we can click Get One, and it's pulling in the new ones now. So the general idea is you're just looking for those specific values. Now this is going to pull in each one of those individual records. So you'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 3, the GV7. So when we go in here, we see 1, 2, 3, 3, our fields, and then updated times. Then you'll see that as we continue to go through, we have GV77. So if you want to pull less data, then we can specify exactly which URL we want. And in this case, we could put 1, 2, 3, 3 to specify the document. Click Save, and just continue to essentially slim down what those records are that are being pulled. So now it's more manageable. You'll see that we have the value 2 here, value 1 here, and those will match up to value 2 and value 1. So that's posting and getting outside of the integration page. Now let's walk through the integrations to basically just show how to pull in that data using this new method. All right, so I've gone ahead and copied over the information that I said I was going to put in the description so we can work with this using these new methods. So what we're going to go ahead and do, since we've already done this, the basic setup for the get record function, we're going to go ahead and remove this button because it's not really needed anymore. So now we're going to continue to work with the original get and original post. So we'll go ahead and click delete. We'll save our changes, and then we're going to go to the integration section. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at an old REST API direct integration that I previously set up. So we have our resource ID in the description, not really necessary, but that was the general idea. Now you'll see here that we have resource URL, and this will look very familiar. It's what we were just using as our base URL up to the /chat. Now we have get. So a couple of things to note here. You'll see that we have our base URL and we amended it to add in an ID. And the ID is basically like it was here. We are figuring out, okay, we want this URL, but maybe we want to specify a certain document, collection, etc. So you can do that in the get collection, where you pull the collection, which would be this collection, or you can do the record, which is a specific document. So we can go through the specifics of that now, but very similar situation with doing a post. I don't usually use the direct integration for posting because we just looked through it and did it with that specific method we were just looking at. So we'll click Create Data Entity, and you'll see we have a couple of choices. We're going to choose Universal REST API Integration. Now, I'm going to go ahead and copy my URL when we do this. So I've set it up in another document. So we'll go to Integrations, again, Create Data Entity, REST API Integration. Now, we're going to go here, and I've already copied our value. And this is a record that we currently have. It's specifying right here. So what we're going to do is you can name it. We'll just say test. And then you have your base API URL. This should look very familiar. So in this case, you can't set it up in the exact same way. So we can't have the quotes, and we can't have everything else set up. So for example, we can't use the actual project, or what we would say the app variables here. So we're going to have to remove this and put in our actual project. So what I'll do is I'll put project right here because we actually have to type this in a moment. And then you'll see that we have to specify the document. So in this case, we may just want to pull, since this is the base URL, we can specify all of this later. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and grab this project name one more time. This is the one we've already used previously. And we're just going to click Control-C. And we'll paste that in here. and Control V. Now what we can do is we can remove this. Now what I'll do is this will be another URL, which I will put in just in the video description. That way you can kind of tell. And what I'll do right here is I'll just put project in all caps. Again, you can't use those page variables here, to my knowledge at least. So that's the general idea. Now you can add in additional headers or inputs like your query parameters, but that's the general idea. Then we could just put description. Now when it comes to the query parameters, so what I can do is I can click save, and you'll see we have to enable an operation first. I'm not a huge fan of this, but we could do a couple of different things. So we can update, create, retrieve, or list. Let's use the retrieve option. So we've chosen the retrieve option, and you'll see that we have our relative path. Now we don't have a value set up here, but you'll see the request method, and then we have our headers, body mapper, response mapper, etc. So what we can try to do now is click save. And now what we're going to balance between is the test and the chats, because we want to see how can we bring our old content in. So you'll see right now we have everything up to the text chat. Now we're going to go to our get collection. So you'll see here we had chat/ID. So let's go back to our test. And what we're going to do is we're going to put chat in the base URL as well. And then you'll see we have our resource schema by default already has ID. When we go to retrieve, you'll see that when we hover over here, this should carry over the IDs. So what we can do is if we're just trying to retrieve, let's click on test and see what happens. If we click run test, you'll see that we immediately get all of the data. Now, the problem here is we're retrieving the entire collection. So 1, 2, 3, 3, this, and this. So when we go here, you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, 3. You'll see that we have the other one and then the other one here. Maybe we want to specify something a bit more specific. You'll see that we can go to the schema if we want, but we probably want to configure this a bit more. So you can go through the response mapper if you want, but maybe we want to bind this to a specific value. So maybe we want to do static text and map the URL a bit more. Or maybe we want to do a formula and specify a page variable. So you could just go here and type in page dot and basically tie it to a given variable. So you can go through, or maybe you want to do an app variable or whatever the case may be. But the idea here is you want to figure out what variables or functions that you can work with here. So you have a couple of options here. I don't know how many page or app variables that you could use. So that would be one of those general ideas. But you can read through the documentation to figure out how to go through and append the URL here. I'm not going to work with those page variables at the moment. So what we'll do is we're just going to type in 1, 2, 3, 3, and we're going to go to test. And then at this point, we're going to click run test. Now, you'll see that it's pulling in all three still. So what we would need to do is, if we want, we can try things out and type in 1, 2, 3, 3 here, and you'll see that it's not bringing in much. So what we need to make sure that we're doing when we're doing this static text and this update, firstly, is we need to make sure that our URL is still pulling through and is saving correctly. And then we need to make sure that we are pulling in the correct information. For example, we may want to look at the difference between list and retrieve. So maybe we want to go to 1, 2, 3, 3 here, test the difference, see what we end up with. So you'll see that we actually get pretty much the exact same information between list and retrieve when we're using the get function. Now, the reason for this, and this is where configuring your base URL is very, very important. So if we just want to retrieve, and let's just say we've decided to use retrieve for get record and maybe list for collection. You can configure these different ways. As you can tell, when you select one, you have the option to choose and update things here, but that can get messy. So what we're going to do is we're going to do retrieve. And when we retrieve, you'll see that everything uses the base URL up to chat. Now in retrieve, if we don't specify anything here, it's pulling everything in chat. So when we click test, we can click run test and you'll see everything here. Now if we want a specific record, we can specify -1233. The dash is what specifies the actual document. So now when we click run test, you'll see that we have value 1, value 2, and we have the URL instead of pulling in everything. All right, so the way that we're going to go ahead and go about doing this, we're going to go ahead and disable list and just focus on retrieve for now. So our base URL we have here, and we're specifying up to chat. And I've put this in the document, I'll put this in the description, but the idea is we're specifying up to the chat collection. Now you'll remember if we put a slash, then we go to the document. But if we don't and we only specify the collection, we get all the documents in it. So what we're going to go ahead and do, you'll see that we have specified up to chat. We have this right here, which is our project. So we're going to now in the base tab, continue to scroll down, and we're going to click add new. So you can just click add new, choose text, and in this case, we're going to call it ID. Now I've already added mine. Then once you click it, you can scroll up, and what we're going to do is you'll see we have field display name as ID, the text type or the field type is text. The text type we have not specified. We have required, and then in the field key, in curly brackets, we've put ID. Now in both cases, it's all capital letters. Now we're going to go to retrieve, and in this case, you'll see that we have our base URL here. Now we're going to click here and go to formula, and in the formula, what we're going to do is you're going to see we have a data query option. Now you'll see we have query.additional inputs, but then we also have query.additional inputs and this curly bracket ID, which we added. So when we double click this, that would basically bring in that ID. Now, if you want just to kind of see how this works, when we scroll back through, so if we select ID and we go back up here, if we were to make this ID 1. Now, the general idea is if we go to select a formula, then we can go to our options here and you'll see it now has ID 1. So as you can see, our variable here is dynamic and it'll update basically as we rename it. So what we'll do is we'll keep it as just ID 1 for now. So we're going to double click here and you'll see that it's going to automatically populate this formula. So the idea would be this is the formula where you're going to use query.additional inputs with a capital I in square brackets and double quotes, and in the curly brackets we have ID 1 in caps. So we're going to click save and save. So now when we're in retrieve, you'll see that we have this additional portion here. So when we go to test, if we click run test, you should get an error. But if we type in 1233 run test, you'll see that we now get specifically the records or the documents in this collection. So what we can do is you can click auto detect schema from response, and then you can click save and save. So now at this point, you can go to your variables, your data variables, select your test data variable. I'll keep mine as a collection of data records for now, and you can adjust things from here as well. So for example, if you previously tried to configure, you can remove old values from that schema. Now we're going to go back to our user interface. Now our get function is right here. So what we'll do is you'll see that we now have our get record here. So we're going to click get record. You'll choose the resource name, data entity, test, and then for the ID, we'll remove our previous ID, and we're just going to choose, we can use static text for now. So we're going to use 1233 here. And then we're going to go to our set page variable. We're going to choose variable 4. And then we're going to assign the value output of another node, get record, and you'll see our schema is now set up here. So we can choose the string value for value 1. And then we'll go to the next one and set variable 5, assigned value. And then we'll go to output of another node, get record, and we'll choose value 2, and we want the string value. And you can repeat this for however many you may have, and then we're just going to click save. So now we'll do a quick test. We'll go to our test, and we'll click get. And you'll notice we have this and this. So now let's click here, and you'll see we have D through L, E through O. And that matches D through L, E through O. So we're pulling in that data now. So the general idea here, that's pretty much everything that there is to it. Now, maybe you want to specify a different collection. So maybe we want this one instead. So what I can do is I'm going to get the document name. And what we'll do is we can go to variables and data variables, and you can work with things here. Or if you prefer, from the interface, we can just minimize this, go to get. And within the get record function here, you can specify a different ID. So now what we'll do is we'll refresh the app, click get, and you'll see this one has hello in it, which matches up with our new setup. So there's a couple of things that you need to note here. First is if you make any changes to the structure, for example, if I add a bunch more fields here, then you will need to go back into your integration, back into what we just set up, and you will need to go to test, run test, and auto detect schema from response, and click save. What this does is it grabs and captures that within Appgyver so that when we go to maybe something like a flow function, you'll notice that when we chose output of another node and get record, all of this data is because we set that schema from response. So it's pulling all of that in here. Now, another thing you may be wondering is, okay, we can pull individual IDs, but I want this to be dynamic. Well, you can actually choose to do that a couple of different ways. So we can choose the ID here and choose formula. And then the formula, maybe we want to tie that to a page variable or an app variable. So I have an app variable right now called temp profile URL. I'm not using that, or maybe we just want to use a page variable that we already have that maybe we're not using. So I don't think I'm using page variable 3 right now. So I'll save that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow us to choose within the app or elsewhere what we want that to be. So I'll choose to add this here, and I'll call it variable. And I'm going to assign the page variable 3, because we've already made and used that. So page variable 3 can now be assigned. And when we use get, what I'll do is in this get record function for ID, I've tied it to page variable 3. So now let's test it out. When we go to test and we choose get, nothing happens. Now if we go to the variable and we specify the variable and choose get, you'll see we now pull in that information. And if we choose 1233, we now get that information. So the idea here is you can actually specify for a given record right here what you want that ID to be, and you can make it dynamic based on other functions within your application. Now, that's all of the basics as far as using the integration for records. Now, you can do similar things if you wanted to do maybe a collection, for example. So it all depends on how you decide to actually pull in that information. So if you choose in test, we can, if we want to use a collection instead, then we don't have to use this ID here. So we could always decide if we want a collection instead, we can delete this. And when we go to retrieve, we can just set things up here like this, so that when we run our test, we pull in everything. So now when we go to save data entity and we click save, we'll make a couple of changes to our data variable here, such as having it as a collection of records. And then this way, when we choose to get, we can actually choose to set page variable 4 output of another node of get record. Now, at this point, you'll have quite a bit of content that you can choose. So it's entirely up to you as to how you actually go through and further organize that. But the general idea here is whatever you specify in your schema when you set up this data variable is what you're going to be using. So in our integration, under test, when we've done retrieve, if we run our test, I can now auto-detect schema from response and save. Once I do this, that's going to update how we can edit and use this within our app. So we'll notice now when I go to set page variable 4 and I assign it to output of another node, we'll have incompatible types because now instead of pulling in the string values, we're pulling in the entire record. So in this case, we would be pulling in record or documents, and we see it's an object with one property. So I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of this, but if you wanted to, you can go to your variables and you could choose page variable 4, and instead of having it text, you could make it an object with a different variable inside. Now, when we go to our user interface, you can go through the process, and we can click on Get Page Variable 4, and you'll see that we can assign, because in this case, Page Variable 4 is going to now be an object, we would theoretically be able to get it and assign it based on that. So again, there's a couple of different options that you have as far as how you actually go through and kind of map these things. So page variable 4 being an object, or maybe we want to choose the ID. And again, you can go through and figure out how to assign that here and map it. Now, that part is going to be similar to a lot of the previous Appgyver functionality as far as how you actually pull in the collection, but I just wanted to cover the basics here. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment box below, and I'll see you all in the next video.